Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
Hello everyone, hope you had an okay weekend. It's not been the best one for those coming off the high of 3 hits the weekend before, meaning that, in contrast, I've actually had a vaguely enjoyable one for once, and I'm right back in. Here we are. All that complaining last week, Sam, may have been for nothing, but hey, let's see how it goes. Maybe I'll be back next week just like, oh no, it's bad again, Sam. It's all gone bad. Anyway, with the bank holiday hangovers, I'm sure by now cured by a lovely day back at work. We're here to provide a bit of further assistance as the end of the season draws very nigh indeed. So, yeah, back into it. And as I mentioned, less sad this week. But I mean, I'm joined by Sam as always. But is this a universal feeling? Let's find out. You're right, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, outside of FPL, always all good. Busy, and back at work today. So yeah, back to the old grind. But it wasn't too much of a bad distraction after another average at best FPL game week. I was hoping for a week more like yours, Tom, but only one of us was blessed with that sort of week this time round. We'll get on to that though, and we are talking today about a very interesting and quite fun subject. So I'm looking forward to this one. In the meantime, we are Who Got the Assist. On today's pod, we'll start off quickly with team updates just to remind you all how we're doing. One of us better than the other as of now. FPL Trolls is the highlight of this week, the thing we're going into the most. So we're defining what one is, and then coming on to the chat around it online recently, which has, of course, been a little bit more prevalent, I think, on social media, especially over the last week or so. So we thought we'd take a dive into the ins and outs of what makes an FPL troll, how to define, how to figure out what one is in advance, hopefully, and hopefully rid ourselves of them in the future. Then on to things like the game week preview, the knee jerk, like always. We're going to talk about whether or not it's time for Salah to say au revoir in our teams for the season. And then on to best transfers. KDB obviously on the radar for many. The Brentford boys and Forest will be the highlights you would think of best transfers, but there might be one or two others sneaking in there as well, since we're getting towards the end of the season and it's time for a few different punts in our team. On to bold claims, and then of course wrapping up with best captains. We'll also finish up with our teams and the transfers we're thinking of making. Obviously it's early days at the moment, but at least it looks like we've got the news that we were kind of waiting for, Tom, on the fact that we won't be getting that double game week in 36. Yep. So we can make transfers, or at least plan them over the next couple of days. It is Tuesday, the 6th of May. Game week 35 is very much in the books, and some European ties, some very important European ties, are going on in the midweek of this week. And we've got the Inter-Barca game going on in the background of this one. So well done if you're watching along live. It's looking like a good game, but we appreciate you being here. We try and make it just as fun. And yeah, of course, this morning we heard that there was no double for Villa Spurs, the game looking like it's being moved to Friday evening. And therefore, it won't be a different deadline. We might get it moved forward like half an hour, but it'll still all fit into game week 37 and game week 36 separately, rather than getting bumped forward to game week 36. So it shouldn't really make much difference, should it, Tom?
Nope, not at all. Not at all. I think there are quite a few people who I think were hoping for the double. I think for you and I, without chips and with a fairly low stockpile of free transfers, we were much more on the side of, well, it'd be good if it didn't happen, just to keep it simple, I'm afraid. And I was quite pleased to hear that that kind of happened. And I think both United and Spurs playing on that Friday, assuming they both go through, of course, this week. Not that they're going to be on any FPL radars, but assuming they both go through, I think that's kind of the fairest possible outcome, really. They both have a very similar amount of rest. I think it's like kind of half an hour each way, which is not even Andy's going to whinge about, is he? Anyway, on to the game week reviews for the week just gone. I did switch up this week. I did put myself first, and well, here we go. I populated it with a decent score. So I got 65 this week. Most of it by mistake. I'm not going to lie. So I think probably the key difference, really. I mean, I captained Bowen. I know you captained Isaac, Sam, and they both got equal with the 9. Quite good that Salah and Bumo didn't quite get there in terms of catching up. Salah, a lot of kind of latent ownership. I think he was still over 100%. And Bumo with only that assist, that kind of an FPL assist, shall we say, for I think it was their second goal, maybe their third. Visser as well coming through with me with yet another goal and yes, another bonus as well. So he's got 3 and 3 now. Looking very interesting indeed. But yeah, Bowen obviously the captaincy and Guardiola clean sheet at the back. But yeah, Cole Palmer effectively was the difference for me, I think, between what was going on. I put a post on Blue Sky actually on the day when the game reopened because it was absolutely mad. 3.2% was his effective ownership this week. And I'm not a review ultra, as listeners will know. And it's purely just through dint of having gone through that chip strategy like I did with the game week 33, free hit and the 34, and just kind of playing through. That's the only reason why Palmer's still in my team. So he's a differential by mistake. And, he was, we'll talk about this much later, but he was well on the list to going this week, but now he's played himself into the grey zone of being actually probably a keep actually with Man United at home in game week 37, where he's probably a really good captaincy shout in a bit of a strange week in 37. We'll come on to that later on. But yeah, 65 points overall, and I'm back up to where I started. So basically repair the damage of last week's horrendous outcome. And yeah, again, kind of 30 points off the top 100k. So let's see, it's doable. I think I did it last year. I think I was in this very, very similar position to this last year. And I think I really needed a week like this where I was 20 points above the safety. And I was just quite surprised that it came through so quickly. But yeah, I think that Cole Palmer in particular is the person to thank for that. Along with obviously Bowen coming through was great too. But yeah, all smiles from me, which is very rare, very unusual. Is that replicated for you, Sam?
Well, I was going to say at least one of us still has a hope of top 100k. So I've got all my eggs firmly in the basket of trying to give you sound FPL advice. Although the way my season's going, please don't listen to me. Go with the absolute opposite. I think we had three differences in our side outside of the different captaincy. Obviously, you've already mentioned that I captained Isaac, had a bit of a gut feeling. That gut feeling was actually incorrect. And I will obviously stand by that as well. I don't want to just brush over the fact that Isaac got a 9-pointer and therefore it was the correct decision. He didn't play well, and Newcastle second half improved but weren't amazing. So I think I got a little bit fortunate that there were 3 different penalty calls and one of them actually got given. At the end of the day, you do pick these players because they've got penalties as well, so it is a factor. So I will happily take that 9-pointer double to 18, but it wasn't a great game from him. Obviously, that was matched by Bowen, who I brought in for the hits, 9 points from him. And then elsewhere, the only 3 differences between my side and yours was I played double Arsenal defence, Saliba. You don't have a second Arsenal defender, so you started Livramento, got you an extra point there. Obviously, I did take a hit. That's a difference. But then the 2 players that were different were I had double Palace, so Sarr and Mateta, instead of your Palmer and Wisser. So that was a huge difference in between our 2 teams.
Quite a swing.
And yeah, Sarr, I think, was points dodging to the extreme. Eze, the Palace player I didn't have, obviously burying his penalty. Yeah, it wasn't a great Monday night for me, and 51 points is about as grey arrows get. I think I've wiggled about 200 overall places this game week in the green way, but not anywhere near enough. So yeah, it's yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty ready for the season to be over, Tom. It's been a very disheartening few game weeks, and it feels like whatever I do, it's just like treading through treacle at the moment, and even good decisions don't feel like, and I'm making a lot of mistakes too, by the way, but even the good decisions don't feel like they're being rewarded either. So yeah, it's quite disheartening. But I'll keep plugging away, and I'll keep trying to give you good FPL advice because my season's going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen the season now. I think George in the chat has just said there's a nice shout on the Isaac cap, and you kind of just discussed why it kind of maybe it's a bit more complex than that. As I said, you did get a little bit unfortunate in terms of just how Newcastle played in that game a little bit. All it would have taken would be a couple of penalties and you'd have been laughing, which is is the ultimate sort of outcome versus performance thing, isn't it? And Yeah, I think the penalty was only a second touch in the box, wasn't it? The
Yeah.
whole game or something ridiculous like that. And he definitely did look a bit off colour. I'm probably going to retain him for another week, at least for the Arsenal game, see what happens. And then 38 to Everton, I believe. So I think that he may kind of stick around to the end of the year and just hope that maybe, I watched the game and Anthony Gordon looked a lot better when he came off the bench, like really, really lively. So maybe he'll reinvigorate Isaac a little bit. So yeah, I mean, it's just been a very difficult season for you. And I think it's just one of those that, yeah, I mean, we've really kind of started discussing it quite a lot, haven't we? Just offline, then we'll come to it again kind of online in a couple of weeks' time. But just trying to start thinking about kind of next year and what you maybe will do differently and how you might approach it slightly differently, and we're learning from this year. Because it's all learning. It's all learning, isn't it, at the end of the day? Right. Speaking of learning and speaking of trying to figure out do things slightly differently, this week we figured, last time we said, are we going to have some fun should we have fun towards the end of the year if our season's effectively over? And in the spirit of having some fun, that we spoke about on Legion last week, we thought this week might be interesting to look into the idea of trolls in FPL. I was speaking to FPL Rafinha and a few others on Blue Sky. Sorry, I don't remember exactly who it was, but Rafinha is the name is stuck in my head. And it was definitely being chucked out a lot on socials this week. And I don't know, we were casting around for an idea, and I kind of said joking, I've posted you and I've tagged you in this, but actually these could have legs to have a chat about today. Obviously massively qualitative again. We're not going to be proving anything empirically for matters I think that will become very clear through the discussion, but this is one which is interesting to get into. And we've got loads of bits and pieces as well on social media, so lots of kind of qualitative evidence really of what trolls may be to help guide the chat, and as Sam said earlier, get some sort of idea of if there are different types of trolls and all these sorts of things. Yeah, I mean, you've got to say it these days for some reason, but obviously we're not criticizing the players as individuals. We're purely looking at them through an FPL lens. I don't know why you've got to say it these days, but it seems to be an important disclaimer to make explicit nonetheless. Anyway, Sam, what's an FPL troll and why might they earn the label of a troll? We've got loads of testimony from the community, but for you, why does a player kind of be a troll for you?
So many reasons, Tom. I've got a list that I'm going to say in a minute. But first of all, I like the fact that you put in the little asterisks that we don't hate these players in real life. We just hate them as FPL picks sometimes. Just on the outside chance that maybe one of them listens to the pod and gets offended by it. That would be great if Lucas Digne listened into the pod on a regular basis, for instance. Yeah, we're going to be quite mean about you today, Lucas, but it's not about you. It's more about us. I'm sorry. So an FPL troll, I think we all know anecdotally what one is because we feel it in our gut, because we know how frustrating FPL can be at times. And through any given season, we're likely to run into 2 or 3 trolls minimum each. I'm going to list off a few that are relevant to me this season, just as like a food for thought kind of thing. Maybe do this exercise at home if you're listening in. Starting off with Calvert-Lewin. After that, João Pedro came in for Calvert-Lewin. Calvert-Lewin was horrendous. We'll go into the reasons why they're different types of trolls in a minute, by the way, as well, because I think that's really interesting. Semenyo, for a very different reason, was also a massive troll for me. Lewis, Jackson, Cunha, for again a very different reason. Then on to Wood. Arsenal defence, generally, ever since I brought double in, they've been horrendous. Star, Mateta, Asensio, which is obviously the thumbnail boy for this week. And then for me, a different type of troll altogether, which I've mentioned once or twice on this pod, but it's not something that are in the show notes, but I think we should cover it a little bit, which is a team being a troll. And that is Southampton for me this year. And I think it's a whole different type of troll when your own club manages to torture you all season on the pitch, but then also in FPL terms, manage to somehow take points away from you, even when you back against an 11-point side. That is a huge achievement in troll history books. So I had to add them in there. So it's a long list of trolls for me this year for very different reasons. And it doesn't just mean that they're necessarily bad FPL players. I mean, I listed a couple there that at times have been very, very good FPL picks. I also missed, I can't remember whether I said Chris Wood or Cole Palmer as well, but they've been trolls for me this year, but they're obviously objectively very good picks for a lot of people. So Tom, I think you've got some notes on this yourself as well, but what different types of trolls have you identified this season, and what different trolls has the community come out with for us?
Well, I think there's lots of different types, effectively, and I just spent ages just cringing effectively at that rogues gallery that you just run through there. Absolutely, yeah, all of them deserve a place in the Hall of Shame for this season. But I think it's particularly, and you kind of touched on it very very kind of lightly there in terms of the fact that these players are not always, unless their name's Dominic Calvert-Lewin, bad FPL.
Yeah, I was going to
picks.
say that's an exception.
It's
bad.
just the case that they've, in terms of your personal context, they've offended you in some way, and they've kind of marked their own cards as being trolls. Effectively, I do think that Luca Dean is the name that seems to kind of be passed down in FPL folklore for being the kind of troll. I don't know. I couldn't really figure out exactly why. I can't remember why, because it's been so many years ago. I remember the name. And I know there must have been loads of occasions when he was at Everton. So I remember him being very good over the one sequence when he didn't have any doubles or blanks, right? And we were all focused on blankers and doublers, and then he went off and scored like 50 points in 6 weeks or something ridiculous like that, which may have been like the starter. And then maybe the next season we all got him in for the start of the season, and then maybe it must have kind of unraveled from there. But I don't remember the specifics. I had a cursory look on Reddit and things like that. Couldn't really find anything. The Google AI tried to help me. It couldn't really help me very much because it was telling me about points he scored versus Preston. I was like, don't think you're quite right there, Gemini. But yeah, I mean, yeah, all of those names have offended me in some way, shape, or form this year. And in terms of what we've heard from everybody who contributed to the thread, so thanks very much for that. There are some for this season. So friend of the pod, Dan FPL Gas said Calvert-Lewin, which you'll definitely agree with, Sam. Another one for you. You mentioned him earlier on. Jamie said Semenyo. João Pedro was mentioned by 420, James, FPL Rafa, and Pete. So quite a lot of nominations for him. Oddman Out Cole said Palmer, Sar from Grumpy Man, Jossie said that as well. Foden from Paul Jones, and George in the chat has just said that as well. Olmo said Virgil. James also mentioned Asensio, which is the obvious one. So Rafa also mentioned Cunha for missing a lot of games due to his meltdown. Biati said Watkins, never got him right this year. And even Mbumo has been labelled as a troll by FPL Argus for going off when many sold. So not many players are escaping the moniker this year. But what's really interesting as well is loads of people kind of brought in names from yesteryear. So Heskebo said Bruno, Dan FPL Chancer said Callum Wilson from years past. Barat said my first thought, which wasn't Luca Dean, it was Eden Hazard, which we can talk about. Jay said Edison. Lee Bishop said Martial. And Jamie said his namesake Jamie Vardy due to never getting him on time. And there are a couple more contemplative ones as well. So friend of the pod W said maybe the troll was me. Maybe I'm the common denominator in why so many players don't perform when they're under my stewardship. And FPL Greatest Hits, I didn't even think about this, said Pep Guardiola as a manager due to his innate unpredictability. So yeah, really interesting. And thanks for those contributions. It's just really interesting to see kind of who's got everyone's goat this year a little bit. I don't know, Sam. It feels to me from what you said and all things like that fundamentally there's a whole array of reasons why a player might be a troll, but just to kind of get some sort of idea of kind of the three different ways in which there could possibly be somebody like that, a troll. One is the troll of impotence, perhaps. There's maybe a touchy subject for some people, but anyway, some of it's about a player like not performing when the fixtures were there, and it's mostly in the short-term category. So Calvert-Lewin, Palmer, Sarr, and Foden would be kind of names that I put in that category. Other one's about the troll of patchiness, about timing. So Olmo said he got Van Dijk when Trent was on a mad one, and vice versa, and managed to miss all the points. So Van Dijk is a bit of a troll for him. Us with Wood, avoided him for so long, finally got him in, did bugger all. I did exactly the same with Jesse Lingard and Danny Ings in seasons gone by. Semenyo, when he had that long tranche of fixtures and was a bit rubbish, when you benched him, and then there you go, he had loads of points all of a sudden, and lots of other longer term ones here as well. So as I mentioned, Bruno, Wilson, my man Hazard, Martial, all shouts to the player. You're not able to get the timing right when it comes to owning the player, and that amplified impact of them scoring when you don't own them and doing soddle when you do. And I think that the last one is there are probably quite a few players like this, but the troll of unpredictability, you can't figure out exactly when they're going to return. Bench him for returns and play him for the easier games. He doesn't do anything, and that just feels to be sort of crystallized in João Pedro. Like so many people seem to be so upset about João Pedro this year. His name's cropped up again and again for going and missing in games where you start him and expecting to score him, and then doing bits in the tougher games where you benched him, or you've maybe kind of had enough and then sold him, and suddenly, hey presto, there he is scoring. So yeah, the troll of impotence, the troll of patchiness, the troll of unpredictability. I think maybe those are the three that seem to be out there. They all kind of take different things, don't they? But that seems to me to be the temperature that I got. How does that sound to you?
I mean, I agree on all of those points, and João Pedro sums up a lot of them all at once, which I think is very, very neat. I'll add a couple of like extra ones, which might not necessarily be whole categories in themselves, but also I think contribute to a player's trolliness. So X-Mins, obviously, that in itself is something that provides us with a lot of variance and a lot of risk in FPL. So if you, again, I kind of have in my mind someone like a Darwin or a Digne from seasons past as well, where they can be liable to getting brought off early. Like they will be in at times the strongest possible 11 for their clubs, but they're never so locked in that you would be massively shocked if they didn't start a game or if they got brought off early. Digne has never shaken that in whichever side he's ever been in, whether that's Everton, whether that's Aston Villa. He's either always had like a deputy that would come on for him or be just competitive enough that he could get a start in ahead of Digne, or of course Digne just loses his place altogether. Then there's another one, which I would say is the disciplinary troll, or the negative pointers, actually, as a more general statement, which includes disciplinary. So you've got Cunha this season, you've got Semenyo for a whole roster of yellow cards week in, week out. You've got João Pedro, who also got sent off fairly recently. Those sort of players that end up getting the red card. I think Cunha was the big one this year where everyone steamed straight into him. We'd done the same, I think, Tom, or at least I had. I think you were either very close to or had just done so, and then instantly get sent off and wasn't useful to us in the really nice patch of fixtures to come. That is definition quintessential trolling to me. And then finally, the own goalers as well, which is a niche subject, but it does happen. Lewis Dunk is a great one.
The name comes straight to my own goal, Dunk.
Yeah, 100%. And then again, I think it contributes to Digne's legendary status here. He's definitely had that at some point. I'm certain of it, that an own goal was a factor, or maybe 4 goals conceded and he gets a yellow or gets a red, gets taken, whatever. All of these negative points come flocking in. So the negative pointers, I think, is also part of it. So yeah, I agree with everything you say. And then maybe just those like additional points added into like flavor or season the trolls ever so slightly.
We're going to cook the trolls as well afterwards.
Oh yeah, I hope so.
I do like that we've gone from the beachiness to trolliness over the course of 2 pods, but I think this is good. That's good. Let's riff on this a little bit then. So you've got let's have a think about how we sort of diagnose these trolls and maybe how we cook them, season them, and basically get rid of them. but there's the first one. So the player who's not performing when the fixtures were there, your Calvert-Lewins, your Palmers, your Sars, your Fodens, the trolls of impotence. These ones are quite tricky, aren't they? Because at the end of the day, you found it with Calvert-Lewin, there's always just one more fixture, and figuring out the best time to pull the plug and kind of, I suppose, throw off. It's always better to be the guy who's, or the person who sold early and then watch everyone else fail, or even better, be the guy or the person like I was this year. I was just like, I'm not touching Calvert-Lewin, no way, and watch everyone else go on Calvert-Lewin, which is obviously a source of great satisfaction for me, but chagrin for you. And so, I mean, with a player like that, Sam, I mean, from this year, what have you kind of learned, and how are you going to try to deal with that going forward? If you think, oh, hang on, this player, I think, is probably a bit of an impotent troll.
Yeah, so this is a really good one, and it's actually in my notes for next season to remind myself of already. And I think it all comes down to the data here. So if you've got a player like a Calvert-Lewin, and I've also added Jackson to this, as well as Darwin Nunez, that we've all fallen victim to at certain times in the last couple of seasons, those players have Calvert-Lewin maybe to a lesser extent, but he also comes at a lower price. So I think that's fair. Have all at times had really good underlying data. And a lot of us have been tempted by that data, brought them in for that reason. And then they are for at least a little while, maybe 4 or 5 game weeks in a row, underperforming that data quite considerably. Maybe they're just on a complete blank run, no goals in 3 or 4 games after you brought them in. And I think the difference between a troll and a player that maybe you should be a bit more patient on is, do they have a history of underperforming their data? With all 3 of those players, I think it's fine to go there in the first place and take a risk that the data could reflect an upturn in the future. But I think you should have a much shorter fuse for players that have a history of underperforming their data. You should almost give them maybe a 2-week, 3-week grace period at most before thinking, okay, this is just a consistent thing that they're going to continue to do. Whereas on the flip side of things, if you've got a player that historically performs level with their underlying data and has a fairly long track record of doing so, we're looking at maybe Mbermo, a Bruno Fernandes, a Haaland now as well, and they're underperforming for a little while, I think you can give them a little bit longer in your team before calling them a troll and saying, we need to get rid of you. Because actually at that point, I think they become a troll if you get rid of them, because they're always quite likely to start kind of moving back towards the mean, which is they tend to perform around the level that their data suggests they should. So identifying the players that have tended in the past to underperform versus the ones that perform pretty well versus their underlying data is where I would maybe create a view and create a sort of a troll-ometer on them to figure out whether or not they become the troll once you sell them and they start performing, or they are the troll for just being in your team in the first place because they do consistently return far lower than you'd expect them to. Looking at you, Darwin.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like I think there's kind of 2 parts that aren't there. So Nicholas Jackson's just kind of looking at it quickly. Owned him from game week 2015 to 23. I think we both did around the same period where they had a really nice run, Chelsea, throughout that entire sort of shebang, starting with a game against Spurs, where even at that point we were thinking, yeah, okay, let's target those guys. Went to game against Brentford, which he did score in, so like, oh, that's fantastic. After that, took in games against Everton, who were then struggling, like so Ipswich, Palace, who then were struggling as well, Bournemouth, Wolves, who were really struggling at that point, and then finally sold him just before he got an assist away against Man City at 23 points during the course of that run. And you're right that that's kind of a player that perhaps we both should have kind of thought, well, it's just not quite working out. And a lot of that kind of does come from the eye test a little bit, perhaps. Some of the underlying data here is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. If you look at Bournemouth, for example, his XGI was kind of around the 1.4 mark, but he walked away with 1 assist. It is very difficult to know when to cut the cord with players like that, but sometimes you can get an idea. And I'm afraid my mind doesn't go back as far as game week kind of 18, 19. I don't know what the other options were out in the zeitgeist at that time, but I'm sure there were other players that we probably should have been looking at a bit more and thinking, you know what, this has not quite worked. We should pull the plug. With the longer term ones, though, I think you are probably right. Like Eden Hazard is probably the one player that I remember or that I think of when the word troll's used more than Luca Dean. I think I may have escaped that a little bit. But with Eden Hazard, I could never, ever time him right, honestly. Like I was forever captaining him in easy games. He did nothing, selling him, and then he'd go on like a random run during a really tough sort of period of games. Like he'd have Liverpool, Newcastle, which around that time was probably not the worst game in the world, and then Villa and something like that. So I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm going to remove him, buy someone else in, and then he'd go off and score, double-digit hauls for 3 games in a row, and I'd be like, for God's sake, buy him back in, and he'd go on another fallow run. And I don't know. I think for me, he's one of those players that, he was one of those that you had to just kind of take the old sort of Leighton Baines approach, like never bench, never captain with Hazard a little bit. Just leave him there, and over the course of the season, he's very likely to accrue you around 200 points or so. Just don't mess with it. But I think, back in those days, I was a lot more kind of trigger happy, and plus there were all those sort of sexy Man City mids hanging around. Like I think his time
Sterling.
overlapped with David Silva, going up to Raheem Sterling. All those sorts of players were around that you kind of couldn't help but want to get on. I think he was around during when Lallana, Firmino, and co were all midfielders, and so it was hard to kind of resist. I remember one notable captain one week finally got me above Nick, I think probably in the second season or something like that of WGTA, which is one of the only moments I actually got him. But the rest of the time, it was just me flailing around in the darkness, just trying to get onto him. And yeah, you're right. I should have probably left him in. So maybe there are some trolls who are just kind of the trolls of impotence. You want to just leave them. You want to just kind of get off as soon as you possibly can. Players like Calvert-Lewin, I think Foden's been talked about by Paul in the chat. And I think that Foden's a good example of that sort of player where, you buy them in hoping that fixtures spark form. I think that's a fair thing to do every now and again, as a kind of a little pump. But I think that it's one of those, and I did do it actually quite quickly, but it's one of those where you really should kind of cut the cord if it's not really working. No matter how good the upcoming fixtures are, maybe if in Foden's case, if there's a double on the horizon, like those who kept the faith or persisted with Foden thinking he'd come good over the last kind of couple of weeks, have been massively punished. So yeah, I think it's probably the right thing to do to be a bit more skeptical about these sorts of players, I suppose, unless there's kind of that sort of amplified sense of pedigree, I guess, with them. So yeah, that puts the impotence ones into the oven. What about patchiness? What's the bold truth here? Sorry, about these guys. So I mean, with Wood, for example, this year, I'm not talking about impotence, I'm talking about patchiness. With Wood this year, it's been one of those where we just left it for so long. I mean, I think circumstances just conspired to make it that he kind of was coming in, but I don't want to kind of open the can of worms surrounding overperforming and so on and so forth. Maybe it is the case we should have bit the bullet much earlier, and when our ranks would be much better off for it. But I don't know, someone like him, someone like Semenyo as well, where it kind of went the other way for you. I mean, how do we diagnose this one and try to deal with this one? Because there's always going to be that player, be it by fate or be it by the fact that there's no room at the inn a lot of weeks, and you end up kind of benching this player because at the end of the day the fixtures on the table are loads better for the ones you've got on the pitch. So it kind of makes sense, even though it's annoying that player scores. Like, it's such a confusing one to try to diagnose and deal with, isn't it? This one.
Yeah, this is the one that I think it's almost impossible to give a correct answer to, because it will happen to everyone at some point every season, where there's a player that seemingly for all of the world you wouldn't expect to continue this streak. Almiron is one that I always remember. I think Danny Ings was spoken about in the past as well, although I got on him quite early because I was a Saints fan and enjoying him scoring every week. But there's always one, and it's kind of the exception that proves the rule. There's always that outlier. And I go back to what I think it was Simon said on an earlier pod this season, that there is a player base of, what is it, like 1,000+ players? Yeah. There's going to be one that dramatically overperforms the data for quite a while. And there's also going to be several that probably underperform quite dramatically for quite a while as well. But who are we to say when that regresses back to the mean? Now, Chris Wood, there were other factors. Forest were flying. The system was working really well. And he was consistent. He was scoring consistently enough at a price point that was easy enough to get to, that we probably, looking back in retrospect, should have just been like, okay, how much damage is it really doing if I buy him now and he stops scoring immediately? Not that much. Especially because we probably both had Nicholas Jackson in our side at that moment. Then it probably made sense to just bite the bullet and go a few weeks earlier than we did. But our stubbornness cost us the moment that he was in form. And then by the time we got to him, it had dried back up a little bit again. And the inverse kind of happened with Semenyo for me, where I had him that whole time when the form wasn't great. And then every time there was a tougher fixture, I benched him and he was the one on the break getting the returns. So there are a couple of factors where I think it depends on the type of opponent they're playing. And I think it's less simple than it just being, easier opponent on the fixture ticket equals more FPL points, there are factors like Bournemouth love a high press, and teams that like being on the ball and sit and working out from the back are likely to get caught by them. Bournemouth do well against those sides, and we've seen them do well against the bigger sides this season for that reason. We saw it against Arsenal this week as well, even without Semenyo. I think he was benched for quite a while of it. So yeah, those sort of factors also tie in those game state factors. But yeah, timing it is a really difficult part of FPL. And honestly, if we had the perfect answer for this part of it, we'd win FPL, because timing it is the game. That's the whole thing. If you can get on these players when they're overperforming their data for the period that they overperform it for, and then sell them just as they're about to stop overperforming it, that is literally how you win FPL. So
yeah,
if we can get that right, we win.
I think a lot of it is just the fact that FPL can sometimes a lot of the time just reward that patience with a player and having that longevity with a player, where the week to week you can't really do that a lot of the time. Like, there's always going to be a shiny kind of sparkling bauble, which is a different type of option to take. I just to kind of underline this point, this week Cole Palmer got over 200 points mark. He's on 207 points. And during the summer, when we look at this, we're probably going to remember exactly what happened with Palmer this season, kind of for a vast tranche post-Christmas, and kind of the fact that he scored a lot of his points in the early part of the season. And we're going to kind of be able to contextualize that 207 points. Later on next year, we'd have forgotten all about it. And all we're going to be saying is, well, Palmer got over 200 points last year. He's therefore amazing. And we're not going to kind of continue to have that context in our working memory. So I think a lot of the time with these players, it does reward the patience. And I wonder whether kind of the things that make, you mentioned them earlier, as kind of a troll attribute, something where we kind of bear in mind the fact that if a player does have the X minutes and does have the underlying data, that actually probably it'll be all right over the long term. So if you can, and it's very difficult to, but if you can resist selling this player, that often things will turn good, unless it is sort of a player who's, in terms of the beachness discussion, playing for a team where everything's going to kind of everything really isn't focused on the Premier League anymore. Maybe that'd be kind of the difference in Cole Palmer and a Bruno Fernandes at the moment, where you might be slightly interested in Cole Palmer potentially, especially for game week 37. But you probably aren't going to be looking at Bruno Fernandes now, despite the fact that he's also, if he does start, and his X-Men has taken a dive, didn't have a single minute on the field against Brentford, but he might be a sort of player that you would also be thinking, well, all right, he's, when he's on the pitch, he does produce. It's just not kind of quite happening for him. So there is all this contextual information that does come into this sort of thing, and I suppose does again go back to that sort of notion that maybe chopping and changing with players of quality does kind of tend to lead you to be open to feeling like you've been trolled by a particular player, when sometimes actually the obverse is true, that if you just provide a little bit more patience, the ones who remember, I think, when we remove a player like that, like a Bruno, like a Hazard, and then, like I said earlier on, they go on to score more points. It's not the fact that they've been rubbish. Well, Cole Palmer had been a bit quiet, despite the fact that his data was okay. But in the case of Hazard, it's not that he'd been rubbish. It's just that it was just that things weren't coming together on the pitch for whatever reason. All it takes is an outstretched boot from a defender to stop a worldie going in, and suddenly Hazard's got. If that doesn't happen, he goes from 2 points to 10 points, and you think you're a genius. And it can just be little kind of observations like that which can really help. And obviously stuff like review, where X minutes and underlying data is sort of fold into it, and does help you sort of, I guess, sort the wheat from the chaff where players like that are concerned. The final one, the troll of unpredictability. Maybe we should call it the troll of chaos. You mentioned Darwin about in terms of this, and I think that's probably the best way of looking at it. Or a player like Dean, you don't really know what he's going to. He can return 10 points, or he can return 1 point. So who knows? João Pedro and Cunha with the disciplinary issues, but João Pedro in general this year. This one generally does tend to be drawn from players that you do go eyes wide open into buying, knowing they're unpredictable, and you're hoping that for the very small number of weeks, they often are like a tactical switch rather than a strategic switch. You're not buying them for the long term. These are players who, look, they've got a purple patch, they've got free teams that they're playing against in 16th, 18th, and 20th over the next three. Well, I'm going to have a pump for Darwin Nunez because Jota and Diaz are injured, so he's likely to start. And I think it's one of those where you do tend to go into it eyes wide open. But I suppose João Pedro, Sam, this year, and Cunha to a lesser extent with a disciplinary angle, have kind of slightly made this a little bit more difficult, because João Pedro's price at the start of the year we all said was a really good. Everyone was kind of thinking that's really great for a penalty taker, just 5.5, who's a talisman for Brighton. So I can see why he especially has been kind of highlighted as maybe the biggest troll this year for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting on João Pedro because actually a troll isn't just a player who gets no points, because if they got no points, no one would ever pick them in the first place. But João Pedro at times is a fantastic FPL option at just 5.5 million. I think he came into the game and has been hovering there or thereabouts on the price all year on penalties and usually gets really good minutes. There is logic to picking him. His data's good. He's got all of the box checks that you'd want in a good FPL pick at a really good price. So he's become a troll because of that chaos factor, because one week he can have an absolute blinder, come back from an injury and get, was it goal assist against Man City and maximum bonus points in 20 minutes and look like main character energy, and then goes on a completely cold spell for like 6 game weeks in a row, at which point everyone gets rid of him or benches him. And then I think he returned, was it 2 assists and then got a penalty goal against Arsenal in consecutive weeks?
Yeah.
I think. And yeah, and again, that's actually one of the few trolls I didn't fall victim to. It was those 2 fixtures. I actually played him for those. Other than that, I've hit every single negative FPL troll there was this season, including a lot of João Pedro's negative trolling. But those 2 I somehow got away with. I don't know. I assume as a man of intelligence like yourself, Tom, you are aware of The Big Short, the hit movie.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So do you remember there's 2 traders who make their money betting against the market on the assumption that the odds are of like bad things happening are undervalued because people don't like to think about it and therefore they underprice it in the market. So that's how they made their money.
Yep.
And that's the way I see the chaos troll in my mind. Is you always, when you're bringing in a player like a João Pedro or a Darwin or with a hot streak of fixtures, you look at the upside and you think, well, how good could it be? He could get double-digit returns in every single one of these fixtures, and I could be laughing. He could be 10% EO, and I could skyrocket up the ranks. However, because there's that chaos factor, because bad things can happen with these players much more regularly than they happen with your 90-minute men on penalties, week in, week out, with good disciplinary records, very few injuries. Those players have much less of a risk than a Cunha, who we know has disciplinary problems, a João Pedro, who at times does. We undervalue that element of negative chaos happening when the fixtures look good or when the player's on a bit of a hot streak. And I think that's something that I'm going to try to remember, that the margin of variance is wider on these kinds of players, where it can go very well because the upside's there, they'll be low owned and the fixtures are good, but it can also go even worse than you might possibly imagine for whatever reason. That could be injury, it could be disciplinary, it could be just other chaotic factors that we're not even imagining right now. And all of that is to say that you need a transfer to get there in the first place. And that transfer is precious, especially now that we can roll up to 5. Taking the punt on a player like that, it's not just the chaos of having him in that time. It's also the opportunity cost of what else you could have done with that transfer and maybe saved yourself an extra transfer down the line. Like with Cunha earlier on this season, we were both 2 transfers down and gearing up for a blank game week without him in our sides, because or at least I moved quite early on him thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is he goes and plays petulance and acts like a child and gets himself sent off in the FA Cup. So yeah, I think underplaying the negative chaos is something that I'm going to try to avoid next year.
Yeah, I think that's probably about right, isn't it? For this, I think it's difficult to control the troll team aspect of it, even though I really like that. I think it's just basically just if Southampton do come up again, give them a wide berth until Mourinho takes over, and then suddenly we can buy their defence. It turns Jack Stevens into Melito Mark II. But yeah,
I
I
want to
mean,
be in
and
that universe.
yeah. I mean, I do think there's something in kind of the pedigree of the player and those sort of contextual factors about what you know about them, what they potentially can do, can't do. And the people do say sometimes, "Oh, these things even out." I mean, maybe not. I mean, if it's a player like Danny Ings or something, or maybe Chris Wood this year, if that's repeatable, I'm not sure it is. I think Chris Wood is in the in the same vein as your Danny Ings, your Lingards, your Almirons. Almiron was a great call as well. I've completely forgotten about. But other players like Cole Palmer, for example, I only by mistake this week, but it's worked out, and that's because the underlying data was good, and he's a great footballer. And I think he kind of said in the post-match interview, he didn't give a shit what people were saying about him. He just wanted to help his team or whatever. So, I mean, as you kind of nicely put it, the margin of variance is wider where the pedigree is lower, and you can't control the uncontrollable as well. In terms of someone like Cunha, like you can't. There's no metric out there for X head loss. There's equally with a player like Asensio, no margin, no market out there for X missing 2 penalties. And then I think
that's
all these,
unlucky. Yeah,
I know, but all of these things do kind of come together to feel sort of deeply personal, don't they? I don't know what it is. I think it's just when you're personally involved with something like FPL, even though I think we're both because we're both well-adjusted adults, but quite good at taking ourselves away from it if things are pissing you off, like I did last week, and you have on multiple occasions this season. There's lots of key ways for players to basically troll. Actually, just as a closing thought, a friend of the pod, Simon March, who sadly isn't as part of the community anymore, did write about this a while ago. I found his article on the way home and highlighted while personal experience is important, it's important to be able to have distance from that feeling if players who are potentially in kind of the better pedigrees do crop up again as an option, so as not to needlessly limit objective options through intangible subjectivity. So trying to kind of ensure that, okay, this player annoyed me last year, but actually, João Pedro has a great run of fixtures, and I don't want to be that person who is going to be saying no just because he annoyed me a few years ago. I'm sure I did that with Jota in the past, and maybe I'd still, if no matter where Calvert-Lewin went, I think I'd still be kind of thinking, do I really want to take that leap? But if I had been, for example, annoyed by João Pedro this year, next year, I probably would still kind of think, well, he's on penalties. He is able to do X, Y, and Z. We know there's a slight disciplinary risk, perhaps, but I think he's just such a good footballer. All these little kind of individual contextual observations, I think, can kind of help. And just trying to kind of maybe have a clean slate with some players, depending on that sort of North Star of what the pedigree is probably going to be how you ensure that, yes, okay, the margin of variance is going to be quite high with some of these players, but trying to make sure that you still remain objective, even though these players have quote unquote wronged you in the past. I suppose that's a very good way of looking at it going forward, isn't it?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think the pedigree word is absolutely crucial here. The bigger the data set and the more proof you've got that actually historically they are a good FPL pick, then the more you can trust them over a longer period of time and the more faith you can put into them not being a troll and being able to get back to their best if they are maybe in your team and not performing so well. And then obviously the inverse is correct. If they don't have that history of pedigree and being a good FPL asset, what's changed to make them much better all of a sudden? Is it just because they've got good fixtures? Yes, fine. If that's the case, then it doesn't mean you can't pick them, but maybe don't give them as much time in your side before deciding that actually they are just trolling you. And just be a little bit more careful on what the opportunity cost is on those types of players, I think.
Yeah. Although Luca Dean is probably always going to be a no for lots of people, which
is
I kind of see why.
Yeah,
excellent. Well, we got a lot of mileage out of that. I'm surprised. But yeah, no, went deep on trolls. What else are you going to do on WTA? Right. Let's move to the game week preview then for the week ahead. Usual stuff. Knee-jerk best transfers, bold claims, best captains. The knee-jerk this week's an interesting one because I think neither of us have kind of expressed anything in this direction. But I've noticed that Mo Salah, Sam, is creeping up in the transfers out. 73,000 transfers out for Salah this week after the blank against Chelsea, and obviously the goal against Spurs. I think basically Liverpool wanted him to score. There's literally no doubt about it. They all seem to want him to get the goal for that game. But before that, quite a lot of sort of indifferent performances, apart from the Southampton game against 28. Looking all the way past the Leicester blank, past just an assist against Southampton, games against Everton and Fulham, nothing. And perhaps with Arsenal up next and then Brighton Palace, some people are kind of feeling the pinch and thinking, well, De Bruyne's kind of out there, an interesting pick.
Yeah.
Maybe that this is now the time to go against, and the effective ownership, as the Surgeon noted on Planet FPL, is very low this week comparatively when it comes to Salah. Around sort of the 120 mark. I look at the next few weeks, Sam, and think, well, maybe game week 38 against Palace, that he's captainable. I actually think this week he's very captainable as well, by the way. But other than that, maybe you'd be thinking, well, all right, I want De Bruyne. If I hear De Bruyne on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon through leaks is going to be fit, maybe Salah's the way you go. So I don't know. Could Salah be on his way out, Sam? Is there any mileage in selling, do you think?
It's possible. I'm looking at routes just in case, because I think certain leaks that come out on Saturday might tempt me, and I think it's more just because of my position. Like I being where I am, I need to have a big swing or two to even have a hope. And let's face it, I don't really have a hope, so I might as well just have a swing if I wanted to. I have talked about playing sensibly and playing in a logical way, though, so I don't want to just bin off Salah, knowing. And we've talked about trolling. He's been a little bit cold recently, but he is, I would say, the undisputed king of FPL. He will come good. And against Arsenal, fine, on paper, not an easy fixture. But then Brighton, I'm not scared of that as a fixture. Palace after that, also not too worried. And I think the underlying question that we all need to ask ourselves is, do we expect Liverpool to now completely clock off for the rest of the season? Or was Chelsea more of a blip where, okay, they've been partying all week, they've maybe just not had their eye on the ball with that game, and Chelsea are bang up for it because they really have to fight for that Champions League spot. They'd been training hard all week for that exact match. Obviously, they're in the Europa Conference League, but let's face it, that wasn't the sternest of tests. So you'd think they massively had a focus on this fixture. And Chelsea also played really well. Liverpool rotated. Are they going to do that every single game between now and the end of the season? Probably not. They might do it a little bit, but I can't imagine they'll be quite as cold as they were against Chelsea. So I still think Salah gets 2 or 3 returns between now and the end of the season. It's whether or not you think a replacement could do much, much better. And if that replacement is someone that you plan on captaining as well, then I think it can make sense. So De Bruyne would be the obvious one. But you could also use it as a double swap to downgrade Salah quite considerably and upgrade a striker to Haaland if we hear that he starts against Southampton. And that could be 2 different quite aggressive moves that could get you away from a very high EO player. Obviously, it's coming down, but it will still be around 100%. And if you're going aggressive, then you've got yourself a ready-made captain if you hear that Haaland or De Bruyne start. And okay, Haaland will be a -4 for most people, might even be a -8 for some. But if you're really chasing, that Southampton fixture's got to be tempting. I actually don't personally think Haaland will start, but we'll get a leak, you would think.
Yeah.
So if that is the case, then it's going to be really tempting to make that move and kind of bet against Salah for a 3-game week period in the hope that someone else can take him on, especially if you're looking at captaining that player. So basically, long way of saying I don't think it's crazy, but he's also a very good hold. He'll never not be a good hold. It's Mo Salah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one, he's effectively a dead spot if you're not captaining over the next 2. I think in 37, the fixtures aren't that great for a lot of basically a lot of it. So maybe that'd be the week that you'd be kind of holding on potentially, and maybe even captaining against Brighton. I'll probably go for Palmer because I own him, for example. But likes of Isaac, who's a captaincy candidate, has got Arsenal away. Maybe one of the Man City players against Bournemouth at home. So if you expect the swaps of Haaland and Fair, Bumo and has got Fulham at home, etc., etc. So the next 2 weeks, I think you've got to just look at him as being like 100% owned player in your team. There's basically a write-off as an individual. So you're down a slot, and that makes a lot of sense if you are chasing massively, or you're wanting to just kind of take a bit of a risk just due to the position you're in, just to make things a tiny bit better. For me, in the messy middle, I think I'm just about in that messy middle again. I don't know. I think it might just be a case of kind of just not messing with it, just because I don't really want to do it right now. With KDB and Haaland, it's also worth mentioning that if Haaland's playing and KDB is playing, that KDB won't be playing the same role as he has been playing recently. So I don't know how that's going to affect KDB's output. But you'd imagine Haaland be good. Is Haaland going to get the whole game against Southampton? Probably not. And it's Southampton at the end of the day. They've been a troll team. What's he going to do? He's going to blank. And KDB's going to blank. We know it. So what are you doing?
Yeah.
Don't go there. But yeah, I can completely, 100%, all joking aside, see why you maybe keep Salah. I think this week against Arsenal was actually a pretty good game for Liverpool and him. Really, we'll see what happens on Wednesday, obviously. But I think that actually that could be a really interesting game for them and us. We're really defensively now seeing the absence of Gabriel kicking in an awful lot. Raya recently has been he's gone down a rung basically in terms of the goalkeeping elite, the goalkeeping tiers. I don't know what it is. He's been playing like he's a little bit off it. I don't know whether that's just because of lack of reassurance of Gabriel versus Kirior, but he's been a little bit poor recently. And Saliba obviously with the uncharacteristic mistake a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know. I kind of feel like it's not knee-jerk to sell. But equally, it's not a bad thing to hold. And I think that, it depends on your risk appetite. If you want to just kind of consolidate, then fine, just leave them in there. You could even this week actually benefit, and we'll talk about this in the captains a little bit more, but benefit from captaining him really, because he's probably going to have the lowest DO you've probably ever seen from Salah this year. But I don't know, Sam. I don't know. I feel like it's one of those where I can justify and I can understand whatever side you come down on. Obviously, it's going to be a don't buy. I don't think anyone's going to be in a situation where they're buying Salah this week. So that was out of the equation. It really is a case of, I'm fine if you want to sell, but probably the majority you should know are going to keep, and he will be a decently owned player. I don't know, maybe we'll even see him being like 99% effective ownership this week. So maybe we'll have a 1% gain, and those 1% gains, those 5 places, Sam, you'll get from Mo Salah point are priceless. But yeah, interesting one, and I'd be really interested to see who does go without towards the end of the year, and that's for sure. Maybe it's just the fact that apart from De Bruyne in that premium category, we really need a Haaland to be back to get us of interest. I did have a look a second ago. It's like 20,000 people have bought Haaland in, so there are some people who are betting on it. It's just, I don't know. I'm just not quite. It doesn't quite fit into where I want to go at the moment, especially with limited resources and limited free transfers. But there is a lot of stuff going on in the transfer market right now. As I mentioned, De Bruyne has been brought in by an awful lot of people, which is not. Well, it is kind of surprising because we don't really know what's going to happen, but it's not surprising in other ways as well. I wouldn't mind a nice sort of little Indian summer on De Bruyne. People do have Saka as well, Sam, in their team. So going to De Bruyne, I guess that kind of does make a lot of sense. And I know I saw that the venerable scout on FPL itself is also kind of singing the praise of De Bruyne. So there are quite a lot of people kind of having one last punt on the ginger hero.
Yeah, I think it's understandable as well, because it does seem like he's worked his way back up to angry Kev, which we've seen in the past at fairly regular intervals, where I think he's a little bit bitter about not being offered that contract. He still feels like he can do it at this level, and he's got a bit of a point to prove. He started the last 5 Premier League games and got good minutes in all of them, and they don't exactly have a cluttered fixture schedule. Obviously, they've got that game week 37 complexity where they're in the FA Cup final as well. That might be that might be an interesting one to navigate if you're looking at holding on to him for all 3 of the remaining weeks. But I can't see, obviously, this is going to obviously age terribly, but I can't see why he wouldn't start against Southampton. There's another week before the FA Cup final. He's been well rested previously as well, with another week prior. Like, I just don't see any logical reason why they wouldn't start him. And then it will probably be a case of he will start one of the FA Cup final or Bournemouth at home, which would be his final home game for Man City. So it's FA Cup final is more important. Pep will just pick the best 11 possible in that game. He might feel that, I think Grealish has been playing in the 10 in the FA Cup every now and then as well, or Foden can play there. He might actually feel that they're better off with legs in the middle there rather than Kevin De Bruyne in the FA Cup final, and therefore start him in his final home game at the Etihad in game week 37. But what I would say is, if you've got a couple of transfers spare, or you're going really aggressive and you don't mind taking a hit or two, you could have a bit of fun with that position where you go Kevin De Bruyne, Southampton, over to Palmer, and then over to Saka against Southampton in game week 38. And that's actually a really easy, obviously it's not easy, it's 3 free transfers, but it's easy in terms of the logical pathway, and it attacks fixtures with a really high upside player each week. So I don't hate it. And I think this week he makes a fantastic transfer in. It's something that I'm looking at, and I'm trying to work out different combinations to get there that doesn't rip apart my side. A lot of them involve selling Salah, which I'm uneasy about for obvious reasons. But it depends how aggressive you want to go, really. And I'm surprised he's so highly bought in already, considering that we are quite likely to get a leak. So if I'm going to make that move, or any Man City move, it will be in the last 20 minutes before the deadline, because I'm confident that there'll be something coming.
Yeah, I am very interested in the idea of, I've got 2 free transfers at the moment. I'm very interested in doing Kevin De Bruyne to Palmer, Palmer to Kevin De Bruyne, Kevin De Bruyne back to Palmer, and then Palmer back to Saka.
100%.
I'm very, very interested in doing that. As just one of those things that you do at the end of the season, because sod it, there's no time left to be worrying about these things. And I think you're right. 37, I think it's a bit of a write-off, really. I'm not really interested in owning him for that, because I simply don't know. So it would be very much 1 week thing. If we did hear he started, I'm sure it would be at 1:22, or maybe 1:29 p.m. But I think I'd be really interested in doing. I'm not sure I'll captain him though. We'll talk about that in a minute. In terms of players who I would captain, the Brentford boys are being brought in again, even more. Visser by 130,000, the underrated pick. When do we stop saying he's underrated? When is he just rated? 130,000. I think
this is the week.
Yeah, there's so many times you can hear he's underrated before you think, actually, no, I think he's probably a bit rated now. And Mbumo just
overrated.
Behind him, 130. No, he's not overrated yet, Sam. He's not overrated yet. He's not Manchester United Football Club quite yet. But yeah, both of them I think are quite logical picks. And Chris Woods from Forest being brought in by 80,000. Not been a bit topsy-turvy since he's come back from injury with a goal against Spurs. But I mean, it was Spurs. But other than that, his underlying data's been all right. And Elanga as well, a cheeky little pick. I was thinking of bringing him in this week, but it's very much, if I'm doing it, I think I'm going to probably get De Bruyne just for that week, just because. Talk about those contextual factors, Sam. Hudson-Odoi is out, and Elanga did have a bit more chalk in his boots than he otherwise would against Crystal Palace on Monday night. So I'm a little bit less interested in him. You really want him in that sort of central roaming role, and it's just not happening quite without Cho and with Anderson being played, or Dominguez being played, and all that sort of jazz. So yeah, quite a lot going on there. And in terms of transfers out, yeah, usual stuff. Saka being sold by a lot of people, Murphy being sold, didn't get to 55 minutes, Diaz didn't play, and Mateta's been sold as well. Get your take on Mateta, Sarr as well, who does kind of feature in terms of the transfers out. It's their time, isn't it, to probably go, those two.
I'm a little bit worried I'm about to get trolled if I sell them. I'm not going to lie, because Spurs coming off the back of Europa semi-final, where they're going to throw everything at it. I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to sell them and they're going to haul in a massive way against a rotated Spurs side. So I'm a little bit hesitant, but objectively over the last few weeks, especially Mateta, the signals are pretty weak now. He's not been in great form, honestly, since the injury as well. Which maybe I should have factored into my thinking a little bit more. He has shown moments of actually looking quite good in the semi-final of the FA Cup, for example. He looked phenomenal, and he scored that great goal. I think it was against Brighton as well. So he's had moments, but not blockbuster. The XG's taken a bit of a dive, and the minutes as well, which is the crucial thing here, have also taken a dive, as well as he's lost penalties seemingly. So I think there's enough going against Mateta that he can be a sell. And even if he did return against Spurs, I'd still feel pretty comfortable with the logic, knowing that I've brought in someone with, well, either Wissa, maybe Wood, maybe Cunha, maybe Watkins. Any of those also have great fixtures between now and the end of the season. I could make peace with that move either way. With Sarr or with Eze, if you've got Eze, I'd be loath to sell them. I'm more so with Eze for obvious reasons. He's been in fantastic form, but Sarr just feels like I'm about to get trolled if I sell him. Like, he's been objectively brilliant recently. Like, he's in great form, like on the eye, absolutely sensational recently. Obviously, FA Cup semi-final, brilliant. And then against Forest, I thought he was brilliant as well. He was unlucky not to return. So I'm a little bit worried about getting rid of Sarr, but if it's for the right player, I could be convinced. So there's one combination of moves that I think involves selling Sarr, and it gets me up to Kev for a -4. And I think that would be downgrading. It would have to be Isak down to Wissa. And I think I've got 0.1 to do that. So I imagine by the time we get to a point where I'm able to make that move with early team news on De Bruyne, I'll probably be priced out of it by that point. So it might not be an issue for me, but I'm much more inclined to sell Mateta than I am Sarr at this moment in time, based on all of the subjective, intangible kind of factors that we've seen.
Yeah, just I don't know. He seemed fairly anonymous in the game on Monday night. I only had it on the background, so I didn't watch it in great detail. But yeah, certainly. Yeah. Okay, great. System manager this week. It has not fallen well for those who still have the system manager in their pocket. I think you really are looking, because it's just the bottom three, I think, who do count as table bonus. I don't know if Spurs versus Palace does. I don't think it does. So yeah, it really hasn't fallen very well at all. For those who are looking, no, it doesn't. So playing assistant manager this week in the table bonus, I think you pretty much just chuck it on Pep, don't you, against Southampton? And just hope for a big bang. Maybe a Nuno versus Leicester, but I don't know. It feels, Sam, like, yeah, you just kind of take the 10, 11, 12 points from Pep and move on, don't you?
Yeah, and at risk of being trolled by Southampton yet again, if I had assistant manager, that is 100% where I'd be putting it. I do like Forest at home to Leicester, but I can see a universe where Forest just haven't looked that brilliant recently, and the teams do hate each other. There is a rivalry there. So if Leicester are ever going to up their game a little bit off the back of a win as well. So again, it was against Southampton, but it was still a win. Their tails might be up a little bit. Yeah, Vardy's looking for his 200th goal. All of these like annoying little narratives are just itching away at the back of my head. And I think I think just City away at Southampton is just too screamingly obvious for me to go against. If I did have it, I wish I had it. I don't. So if you do, yeah, it'd be Pep for me, 100%.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I'll get your analysis of my team later on, whether it's worth doing the De Bruyne move, because there's lots of ramifications of that. But yeah, if you're not interested in what I'm doing particularly, don't worry about it. That'll be at the very end. Next up, bold claims. Nothing happened this week. We've gone down a percentage point in terms of the hit rate. We're now 1 in 5.
It's fine. 1 in 5 sounds all right. It's nice and round. I went Jacob Murphy, double-digit haul. I benched him, and he came off on the 55th, 56th minute. And Yeah, I feel pretty good about it because I benched him, so that's absolutely fine. I did have a bit of a gut feeling he'd do well in this one, and Newcastle really disappointed me. So, yeah, I'm glad I benched him in the end.
Yeah, I have 30 plus goals this week. I think I fell short by 3 or 4. I think it's 27 goals scored. I think we did a 3-2 in the Palace, 3-2 plus in the Palace Forest game. And from the first 10 minutes, I could tell that wasn't going to happen at all. It was very, very bad. Right, and for the week ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going on the note of the Forest game. I'm going with a double header because it didn't feel bold enough to just hope for a Chris Wood blank. So I've also added on to that Leicester will score against them as well, just as a little sweetener to make it bold enough, because we all know Leicester don't score many goals unless the team that they're playing is someone that I'm bench boosting the goalkeeper from, or it's my own club, Southampton.
Yep.
So yeah, Wood blank and no Forest clean sheet for me.
Yeah, Jamie Vardy just needs a chance, doesn't he? I think Leicester and Forest don't like each other, do they? So
No, they don't.
it'd be a good rustling moment for Vardy, I suppose. So, yeah, but fine. I can get on board with that. I'm also on the compound, and it is just because Southampton have ruined my life this year. Not as much as you, but they've ruined my life this year. KDB and Marmoush blank versus Saints. I think that's
welcome to the club. It's really friendly here.
Yeah.
Down on the south coast of shame. On to best captains. This is a good one this week, I think. Brian Mbeumo as a starting point, I think, will be probably the obvious one for a lot of people, or like the bus team captain right now. I put out a quick tweet just because I was doing some early digging yesterday. Against promoted sides, he's only blanked once, and in all of the other 4 games this season, he's gotten quite large double-digit returns. I think it's something like 14, 15, 15, 19, something like that. And then the only blank was against Leicester, which was 2 points. So, yeah, I quite like him as a bit of a flat track bully. It's away at Ipswich, but Ipswich down that wing are very leaky as well, down the Leif Davis side. Yeah, I'm struggling to see past it right now. Obviously, City is another option. We can talk about them. Chris Wood at home to Leicester. And you've mentioned Salah as well against Arsenal, still always a factor. Where are you leaning at the moment, Tom?
I've got it on Whisper at the moment, but I think that we'll talk about this in a minute. But it depends kind of where I am really. I think that Boomo and Whisper have both contributed, as you astutely pointed out in your tweet, well against those sort of the flashback bully basically. There's also that sort of compound where I think if one's involved, the other one's going to be involved, unless Sade takes their thunder. So,
yeah,
no, I think that Boomo is your sort of high floor captaincy this week, and I'm fairly sure he's going to be occupying probably the top of the podium actually in terms of the effective ownership this week.
Yeah.
But the good thing is that you're still going to gain from captaining him. You're not going against like a Salah or something. You're probably going against you're probably going with 140% owned captain. So there's still quite a lot of gain in going with Boomo this week. So it's one of those where last week I think it was truly an open sort of split. This week I think that most of the consensus is going to align behind Boomo. So I think it's one to really think about depending on where you are. Where you are going to be rocking the differential captain, or whether this week actually there's enough mileage in going with the chalk one. I think this week there might be enough mileage in going with the chalk one. I do like Vista actually. I think he's in he's in a good form in inverted commas at the moment, and his XGI is really bloody good. Last game with United, he registered an XG of above 1.2, which just underlines kind of how he's been doing over the last little while. 4 goals in 4, 5 returns in 4 as well, for whatever that's worth. And it just really seems like he and Brentford have got the bit between their teeth and all that sort of thing. So I quite like either of the Brentford boys. I think that's absolutely fine as a captaincy shout. Elsewhere, Woods or Elanga versus Leicester. Mentioned obviously that Leicester have been very, very poor recently. Forest, I don't know. I was just Garden Football Weekly today, and they were saying, and it's quite a good point actually, that maybe teams have kind of gone, well, actually, Forest, we know how they're going to work. We know how they're going to set up. So maybe we can kind of deal with that a little bit. let them have the ball almost. It's just Leicester's defensive solidity is the same as a packet of biscuits, isn't it? So you would be expecting a Wood or maybe an Elanga, depending on where he's playing, to come through for you. I think that's probably the best sort of differential captain pick out there in terms of the fixture, isn't it?
Yeah, I think Wood does make a lot of sense. He's not registered over 0.26, I think, XG since game week 24. So he's in a bit of a barren spell, only 1 goal I think in 9 games as well in that time. And Forest just aren't really creating many chances for him. But all of that being said, none of those games have been against Leicester, and Leicester are incredibly leaky. And you'd imagine Nottingham Forest have this one down as absolutely massive game that they need to get 3 points in. Not that they're not all thinking that about every game right now, but you'd think that they can get the better of them. I do like Chris Wood as an option. I am considering it because I'm chasing, going with him instead of Wissa, because I think more people are going to head towards Wissa. But I think a more logical part of my brain is just saying Ipswich is an equally good fixture. Wissa is getting far, far better chances, far more of those chances, and a bigger XG generally, and is in better form, obviously slotting them as well. And Brentford are also in much better form. So yeah, I don't mind Chris Wood as a differential, but probably not top of the podium. The Man City boys, I think, if I was going to go against Mbeumo, would be more likely. But again, that's all dependent on hearing that they definitely start. I wouldn't be confident enough going with Marmoush, for example.
No.
So it would have to be a Kev or a Haaland, I think. Maybe Gvardiol wouldn't be the craziest thing ever.
He's got my advice.
Yeah, if he's left back, genuinely, he'll be playing in our half, playing probably in our box for a lot of it. If he's left back,
if he's centre back, he's probably playing in your half.
Yeah, that's true.
The majority of the game, isn't it? Let's be fair.
Yeah. But I think if he's left back and O'Reilly's on the bench, Gvardiol might not be the craziest shout. So there's a very good chance of a clean sheet. Plus, if he can get a goal, then that is a huge return. So I think the upside is there for Gvardiol. Don't completely write that off. But if there's an early team leak on Haaland or Kev starting, then those two would be in the mix for me. Probably more Kev than Haaland, because I agree with you that I think Haaland probably only gets 60, 65, even if he does start. Whereas Kev, it's more likely to be 85, 90. And yeah, bit of romance there. So, and Mbeumo's my bus team captain. I doubt I'll move it, but if I did, it would probably be for one of the City boys.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that the problem with City is that it's so inextricably linked together. So if we hear one or the other of De Bruyne and Haaland is starting, right? So I agree with you. I wouldn't be looking at Marmoush. Then maybe you go in, you captain De Bruyne, and then Haaland would start. And then you'd be like, actually, this might not be the better. I think De Bruyne playing number 10 is nothing to be sniffed at, is it really? Or, but does that mean that he does end up kind of stepping back? And then all you might see is that Foden's been given the chance to play this game. What does that mean for De Bruyne? So I think nice to own De Bruyne. I'm sure that Marmoush as well in kind of a lay community, as it were, is going to get a lot of interest. It's just there are so many sort of interlocking parts for the City guys that I'm just not 100% there. The one I do really like is Salah versus Arsenal, actually. I think that it's purely the only reason it's got my juices flowing, Sam, is just because this is probably going to be one of the very rare moments where you can captain Salah and get a hell of a lot of differential mileage out of it. Do I need to tell you why Mo Salah is a good player? No. Arsenal is a great defense. I have a great defense. I completely agree with that. But I've already mentioned kind of a few of the vulnerabilities, shall we say, that we've been showing recently. And I think we can probably allow, because Liverpool went off and celebrated with their away fans against Chelsea. I think we can probably allow them the Chelsea game for the reasons that you cited. I don't know. I think that could be quite an interesting captaincy this week, actually, Salah. I think it's a bit of a dark horse. I agree with you that I'm between Bowen and Bowen, Bumo and Wissa, Bowen an outside shout, but I don't want to captain him away from home, as James and Planet said. But Salah could be a really interesting shout this week if you do actively go with him. The fact is there are going to be those people who just leave it on him because they're not playing anymore. But there's still going to be a lot of players in the X players, ghost players, zombie players in the top XK who still have him as their captain. So he's still going to be quite a high percentage captain. That's for sure. George in the chat actually said if Zinchenko's playing that game, definitely Salah, and I can't agree more, frankly. But we're likely to not know that, unfortunately. It's the last game of the game week, isn't it? So we'll see. We'll see. I think that's an interesting one. But I think it probably is going to be one of the Brentford boys for me. It just has to be at this moment. Right, onto our teams for the week ahead. Oh God, where are we going, Sam?
Sorry, we both clicked at the same time there. I think I'm first up, so this is how I'm bus teaming it at the moment. I've got Raya in goal away at Liverpool. I've got a bit of a head-to-head here on Verbruggen away at Wolves, Raya away at Liverpool. I think both concede, honestly. So it's basically just down to which one I think makes more saves, which is effectively a coin flip. I don't think it will make much difference. I think they're both getting 1 or 2 points. In defense, fairly simple. Gvardiol, Munoz, and Milenkovic. Milenkovic at home to Leicester. I'm really hoping for that Thunder Bastard header. That would be amazing. Munoz and Gvardiol auto picks ahead of Saliba and Livramento. Easy enough. Onto the midfield, Mbermo's captain at the moment. I do quite like the Salah pick as a captaincy shout. Tom, I will probably wait to see how Arsenal do tomorrow night, see how leggy they might be, how much they're probably likely to rotate as well. But I really don't dislike it at all. Rounding off the midfield, it's Bowen away at Man United and Sarr away at Spurs, who I do feel will rotate or be at least a little bit leggy. So I don't mind that. Up top, Isak at home to Chelsea, Mateta away at Spurs, and Marmoush away at Southampton. I think one of those strikers is going. I'm not 100% sure which. I think if budget isn't a problem, then it's probably Mateta out for Wissa. But I'm not completely against selling Isak for Wissa or doing a double swap to bring in another striker, either Wood or Cunha. And then I'm also leaving myself open at this point in time for a Kev or a Haaland, just basically like mapping out a route to get there if I get a last minute leak, and I'm very confident on it. So Haaland would probably be Salah and Marmoush going, and I'd probably go for a Sharda, someone like that with Haaland up top. I might not even make that move if I do hear Haaland starting, by the way. And then the Kev route would probably be Salah, or it could be Sarr and Isak for Kev and Wissa, I think just about. But I think I'll probably be out of budget by the time we get to the deadline for that. So I think most likely it's no hits, but 1 free transfer Mateta to Wissa is probably the simple move that makes my team look fine, if nothing special.
Yeah, I think it's fine. I think kind of benching Saliba and playing Raya makes a lot of sense in terms of that. And yeah, I do think that late information for you is going to be so important. Honestly, I don't know. Even though from your perspective, having Salah is just basically a downside mitigation. I like that. I kind of like a game against us for him almost. It kind of feels like one of the moves where you're taking out Mateta does feel like the best way to go here, and especially if you're incurring the hit for bringing in a Haaland for like 60 minutes, but then you've still got Mateta, and even though it is Spurs, I think that Palace team, as you spoke about last week in the Beachness pod, their entire focus is going to be on basically not getting injured so it can play in the FA Cup final, isn't it? Which is going to impact how they play, indisputably. I think everyone's going to be kind of talking me out of that perception. So
yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'd be leaning towards the simple, keep it simple, one transfer route with Mateta maybe going keep Sarr because of your conviction there, and bench Saliba, play Munoz. I think that's fine. I do think that's fine. Mateta for Wissa would be I think perfect, really, for me there. Keep it
Yeah, I
simple
don't
and
disagree.
just go that way. I don't see anything else wrong with that.
Yeah, agreed. One final note. It's been mentioned in the chat. I do quite like Cunha for the rest of the season. I think 3 good fixtures, and if I felt like there was a hope of me getting to 100k, I might be a bit different there and go for Cunha. But I just think it's just so obviously Wissa for me at the moment. I've loved him all season. I love him as a player, and it's great fixture with 2 good ones to come and saves me money. So yeah, I think it's Wissa for me.
Yeah, no, I feel you. That makes a lot of
On
sense.
to you.
Let's see how you feel on Saturday, shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, I've got Jose Sarr, so I'm going to play him over Raya. Just 'cause I think
Yeah.
Raya's just woefully out of form. I'm not sure whether we'll see Raya again in my team until game week 38, to be honest. But we'll see. The same back three as you: Gvardiol, Milenkovic, Munoz. Got Bowen as well. Got Boomer as well. Got Salah as well. I've got Palmer to your Sarr, who's a point of contention. I'll talk about in a minute. And up front, Isaac, Marmoush, and I've got Whisper and Situ already. So that's it. And on the bench is like Murphy, Livramento, and Dunk, who are never getting on the pitch. So Sam, yeah, my initial plan was Palmer to Elanga or De Bruyne, and then back again. But Palmer, I think, has played my way into my thinking. Really, I was watching the game, but I was drinking and I wasn't really paying attention. And the moments I did watch Palmer, it wasn't great. Went back home and drunkenly watched Match of the Day 2, and he was actually really good. So I was like, okay, right, actually, I got that wrong. Yeah, he's actually really good, and I really like the fact that the Newcastle game's sort of meaningful. And plus, he's a fantastic differential captain at home to United in 37. So I could get him up for De Bruyne and buy him back. But if I leave it and roll, those three free transfers really help me in 38 because I can get to Saka, a Bournemouth player, and somebody else in 38 to really target that week without incurring the hit. Or if I'm probably going to take a hit in game week 38 because why not? But I can get to quite a good team for 38 without much worry if I do it that way. So I don't know. I just kind of saw Palm's performance again and just thought, hey, you know what? Probably need to keep this guy, to be honest, rather than trolling myself. But De Bruyne versus Southampton is obviously there, but they've been a troll team for me as well. So yeah, it's a difficult one. But I think I'm probably going to just leave it be. And that opens the door to one more thing, which is defensive transfer. So bench Munoz, maybe. I think that Spurs game will probably be a 1-1 in which no one cares effectively. And I guess the problem is with selling Munoz, right? If you're looking for a defensive move this week, because I've got Sarr, I'm not really interested in like Nori and doubling up on the Wolves defense of all things. So he's out, which means that basically I'm down to Neco Williams or maybe a Ruben Diaz at City. I don't know. Neither of them, maybe Neco Williams, but then again, I'm losing another transfer for probably game week 38 here. Assuming I'm going to do one transfer next week to bring in an Everton player just for the X narrative. None of that fills me with confidence either. So it feels like I'm kind of into roll territory unless Marmoush is benched. If I hear news about that, then I don't know. I don't know whether I go for Haaland, because I still need to sell Palmer or Salah. I'm kind of, for different reasons, reluctant on both of them to go. So maybe if Marmoush is benched, then I move him to Woods. Maybe that's the transfer I'm sat there kind of queued with on Saturday afternoon. But I don't know. It feels like I'm ending up on nothing or a late move. And I've got the captain on Vissa here. I'm 30 points off the 100k now, and I'm wondering whether there's enough positive gain in Boumos. Just leave it on him. I think he's the high floor captain this week, despite Vissa being in great form. So I don't know. It's whether I kind of try to catch a haul or hope that Bumo does bits against promoted teams, which he does seem to be able to do. Even though both of them are probably going to be involved if Brentford do score. It didn't quite happen this weekend, but it has happened this season. So yeah, a couple of things there. But I think the transfer thing. I don't know. Do you think it's worth kind of boomeranging Palmer in some way, or if it has that sort of negative impact on my 38?
I think So first of all, you mentioned the defensive transfer. I would say in your position, I'd focus all of your transfers on the positions with the highest upside. Munoz is still a goal threat. It's a tough fixture, but he could get something. So I'd probably leave it. I don't know if obviously there are scenarios, there are universes where the upside does exist, but it's less likely than in a forward position. So I'd probably leave that. I think it's unlikely that we hear Marmoush is benched. I think he probably starts, but if he is, then that's obviously going to be pretty tempting to move on. I don't know if I'd go with Wood in your position. I think I'd be more likely to go with someone like Cunha, or possibly, can you get to Watkins? Is there enough money?
I don't think I can quite get there. No, it's 1 point. I've got
Okay.
1.6. I think it leaves me just off. Yeah, 8.9. Yeah, I can't do it.
Could you could save the money by doing Palmer to Kev, maybe, and then Marmoush up to Watkins,
I
possibly.
could, but I want Palmer back next week is the only thing. Like, yeah, I think
Well.
Palmer's
So on that note,
Okay.
how about this? Screw Palmer, captain Watkins next week against Spurs.
Yeah,
Now
okay.
that's
I'm
going
on
to be
board.
30 or 40% effective ownership. That could be a very nice bump if you can spike some variance there. And okay, Mbermo or Wissa this week, good captaincy options. Obviously, if you go with Mbermo, you get 60% of the benefit, and you might eke out like 3 or 4 points off that 30-point deficit that you need to. Hopefully, you get a couple extra points elsewhere on the market. And so you're maybe 25 off, maybe 20 if you're lucky. That Watkins captaincy or Palmer, but if you can get a few extra points from Kev this week as well, then I think Watkins captaincy next week could be a lovely, spicy one that could get you a big chunk of that 20 points all at once, when elsewhere it's going to be a split crowd. No one's a real standout captain next week. That's where you can gain a huge margin if you pick the right captain, and not many people are going to be on Watkins. There'll be a few. He might get up to 30-40% effective ownership, maybe 50, but I don't know if it'll be that high. And he's got 2 good fixtures then over the next 2 game weeks. The minutes are a little bit shaky, but I think they're good enough that you could probably find some positive variance there. Just one to think about. I think in your position right now, I'd keep my powder dry if I can. And as long as there's no leak on Marmoush, I'd probably just roll it and ignore the Palmer move, because I agree. Next week, if he stays around 5 to 10% effective ownership, he is your differential captain next week, and that could be massive. So I'd be inclined to probably set yourself up for a big game week 37 and then an even bigger game week 38 with 2 or 3 free transfers to attack Saka, double Bournemouth, really throw all your eggs at those final 2 game weeks. And I don't think you're badly set up anyway for this game week. I think you're fine. That one free transfer I think there's more upside in using it in other weeks potentially, unless there's that Marmoush leak and it's negative, and then you might be able to do something funky and get to Watkins early. But I think roll given no news.
I do like that idea. I think that next week there's a good, like, it's gonna be one of those where I look at Isaac, who's going to have Arsenal away, and think, all right, do I keep you there? Knowing you're going to have Everton at home in 38, or do I get rid of you? Or do I go for an Everton player in the final game, Goodison, all that sort of jazz? But I don't know. I kind of feel like the opportunity cost thing is quite big. But I do like the idea of having Watkins as captain for 2 weeks' time. It's just, do I like it enough? Am I that convinced by it? I did think about it.
It's situational, I guess.
You've definitely given you've definitely given me food for thought there, mate. It's just one of those where I don't know. I kind of feel like I feel like it's been all right. It was all right last week, so maybe going back to that idea right at the start in terms of trolling, what W has said about the biggest troll maybe being me. Anything that I do is gonna screw this up. But I do like that idea a lot. It's just that I think that Palmer's just played his way into it. I really like the idea. I know that Watkins' game next week is going to be quite big. This week, I'm not entirely huge. This week is like it's nice. It'd be fine to have him in the game against Bournemouth. Last year when we sold him for Nunez, didn't we? When he was playing Bournemouth and he went off and scored. So there's history there. It just feels like next week is the time to make that move. So it's very much opportunity costy. The defensive transfer, now I've spoken about it and you've mentioned it, it just doesn't feel worth it. So yeah, it just feels like another kind of hold fast, and maybe I just keep calm Captain Boomer and just go for it. The Marmoush bench is going to be pretty huge. Really, I don't really know what I'd do in that situation because I don't really want to make another move on top of it. Maybe I just do some sort of game week 38 proofing, getting your man Ross Stewart, 4.4 starting striker, getting Mr. Elanga from Forest. So I've got loads of money in the bank and take it from there and go 3-5-2. I don't know. Who knows? But yeah, no, thanks, mate. That's quite helpful, actually. I've lots to think about, but we'll see what we come to on Saturday and see if I've got the wherewithal actually to be looking at my phone at that point. Do message me if anything happens. But yeah, thank you. Very helpful.
No worries. Well, I think with that, it brings us to the end of the pod. It looks, Tom, like we've missed an absolute belter of a Champions League semi-final, but I will be going and watching the highlights now. But thank you all so much if you've been watching along live. We really appreciate it. And if you're listening along the next day, hopefully you enjoyed the Champions League and then also had the treat of us the next morning as well. And thank you very much for staying with us for over an hour and a half of your time. As always, we were Who Got the Assist. You can find us on Blue Sky at WGTA or FPL Pricey, WGTA_FPL on Twitter, or FPL Pricey on there for me, Instagram or Threads, WGTA.FPL, FPL Pricey again for me. If you did enjoy the pod, if you could please do one or all of the following, including following us on the social channels I mentioned, giving the pod a 5-star rating, whether that be on Spotify, iTunes, wherever, or of course, leaving a like and hitting subscribe on YouTube is greatly appreciated as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for listening and watching. We hope you think about Trolls and the game week ahead. We'll be back this time next week. We're back next week for our anti-penultimate pod of the season. Yes, only 3 to go. We'll see you next. It's Tuesday, not Thursday. It's Tuesday.
Oh, it's a goal. Who got the assist? Who got the assist?
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.